What's happening, friends? Welcome to another episode of Syracuse Sports. My name is Brent Axe. Thank you so much for being here. And I'll tell you what, you know what's amazing? Modern technology. You push a button, follow, subscribe, and when a new episode of Syracuse Sports is available, there it is for you to listen and watch whenever you want. What a great country we live in, right? So if you listen on Spotify, if you listen on Apple, if you watch on YouTube, however you prefer your podcasts, make sure you subscribe to Syracuse Sports so you're never out of the loop when there is a new episode of this podcast. Jam-packed edition today. We got a couple of things we're going to focus on. Syracuse basketball, Alex Klein and Adrian Autry have been very busy in the transfer portal. Syracuse, as we speak, who knows, they could be adding more players after this, but as we record this, they have 4 new additions to the roster. Naithan George and Ibrahim Souare from Georgia Tech, William Kyle III from UCLA, and Nate Kingz from Oregon State. So what's the skinny on all these players? Why did they leave their respective schools, and why was Syracuse the best place for them? I wanted to put together kind of an all-star panel here of writers that have covered these gentlemen at their former places and what they're going to bring to the table here at Syracuse. So joining us in kind of a mishmash of writers, Chad Bishop from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Ben Bolch from the LA Times, and Nick Dashel from Oregon Live. You'll hear their perspectives on the new Syracuse players coming up. You know who else you're going to hear from? Jordan Reid of ESPN, one of my favorite NFL draft gurus out there. The NFL draft approaches. This is going to be an NFL draft that's going to have Syracuse on that bottom line ticker more than we have seen in maybe a couple of decades, depending on how many players get picked. 4, 5, maybe even 6 Syracuse players could go in this NFL draft. So I turned to Jordan Reid. We went rapid fire style. I threw the name at him. He told me what round maybe they could go in, where they fit in the NFL, where they could get drafted. Everything you want to know about the upcoming NFL draft when it comes to Syracuse. Jordan Reid joins us to discuss that, so I'm looking forward to you hearing both of those conversations. But on basketball, briefly here, one thing I am encouraged by here, when we went into portal season and we were having those end-of-the-year conversations, one thing I said is that Syracuse has got to do 2 things in the portal at the very least, right? They've got to get players from higher-level schools. Okay, last year's round of transfer portal players. Now, you had Eddie Lampkin, who was at TCU, later at Colorado. That was good. But when you're talking about guys coming from Delaware and Hofstra and Georgia State and hoping they make that elevation to ACC play, I think what we saw play out this past season is you had a mishmash of guys that just did not translate to the ACC level. Now, certain players had to step into bigger roles due to injuries and things that happened during the year. Certainly when Donnie Freeman went down, when J.J. Starling was out for a while, all understandable, right? But by and large, you want to be dealing with players from higher level conferences. Well, those names that we just mentioned are coming from Georgia Tech, UCLA, and Oregon State. Near Power 4, Power 5 level players. Obviously, Oregon State was kind of on their own after the Pac-12 fell apart. But high-level players. You know, Naithan Kingz is a guy, shot 44% from three-point range. Naithan George comes in, led the ACC in assists last year. You will take that. William Kyle III has a lot of potential in terms of what he can do in the middle. Very athletic, can attack the rim, great shot blocker. Now, Eddie Lampkin certainly held his own as a transfer center for Syracuse a season ago. And how interesting is that Eddie Lampkin has put his name back in the portal, basically hoping to find another year of eligibility from the NCAA. But that's a whole different conversation for a different day. But they're different types of centers. And again, as we speak, Syracuse has not added a second center. I still think they need to do that. But you're taking a player that is coming from UCLA. You're taking 2 players from Georgia Tech and another from Oregon State. I like that Syracuse did that. The other thing that I liked is they got multiple players with multiple years of eligibility left. You know, you look at the guys from last year, Lampkin, Carlos, Taylor, Davis, all one-and-done guys, right? Which you have to do and have to deal with in the portal era. But going forward, I like to see that they have brought in players with multiple years of eligibility left, which tells you that they believe in what Autry is building here. They believe in maybe having the ability to stick around for a couple of years. As much pressure as there's going to be on Autry and Syracuse in general to make the NCAA tournament in this upcoming season, having not made the tournament for the past 4 years. If you've got multiple years of eligibility, of course, you can always go back in the portal the way things work these days. But I like that show of faith. And certainly, I don't know what the budget is offhand, but they've got some more money to spend if they're bringing in these type of players. And again, they're not done shopping in the portal quite yet. So let's learn about those players, who they are, what they do, and why they fit Syracuse with our all-star panel of writers who cover those gentlemen at their respective schools. We'll hear from Jordan Reid with some NFL draft talk to follow. We are ramping up here. Being a Syracuse Sports Insider gives you direct text message access to me to talk about all of these things. You guys have been asking great questions, offering your comments on where Syracuse needs to go in the portal. Syracuse football spring practice. We've been all over that for you, sending you our first observations and videos from practice, the spring game approaching this upcoming weekend. And we have been all over Syracuse spring practice, and you guys have been telling us what you want. Chris Carlson, Javon Edmonds, and I, our football panel, to ask players and coaches. Your comments on the pod have been amazing, and only Syracuse Sports Insiders get their voice heard on Syracuse Sports. We don't take commentary from social media or anywhere else. You get a direct link to this podcast by being a Syracuse Sports Insider. If you're watching on YouTube, it's right there on your screen how you can join. It's in the show notes as well. Just $3.99 a month to be a Syracuse Sports Insider. And you can try it free for 2 weeks, see what it's all about. You just want to talk Syracuse sports, shoot the breeze? Hey, Brent, what's going on with this? What's going on with that? Shoot me a text. That's what I'm there for. But the latest information we have, breaking news, analysis, it's all there as a Syracuse Sports Insider. We would love for you to join our growing community of some of the more passionate Syracuse sports fans out there today. Now, here on the pod, we like to feature your original music and all the info on how you can get in touch to have, if it's your music, if you have a friend, someone in the family, someone you know that's a great musician and everybody should hear their music, get in touch. We love to feature your original music here on Syracuse Sports. Backyard Wrestling, that's the name of the band. It's great, isn't it? Is one of my new favorites, and we're going to feature a song from them today called Weekend Warrior. There's a really cool video they made of this for you wrestling fans out there that you want to check out on their YouTube page. And again, that's linked in the show notes here. So we'll listen to a portion of that song now, and then we'll play Weekend Warrior by Backyard Wrestling in its entirety at the end of the podcast. But coming up, our all-star panel on Syracuse basketball's transfers and Jordan Reid from ESPN to talk some NFL draft.
I lock eyes with my manager, Dave. And he walks up to me to say, can you stay just a little late? I know you got a lot on your plate.
That would be great.
So I contemplate how much more of this I got to take. But for now I'm plotting my escape. And when I make it to the end of the day,
if you're doing the math, 50% of Syracuse's transfer haul so far has come from Georgia Tech. So we turn to this man to tell us all about the yellow jacket to orange connection here. Chad Bishop can read his work on the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Chad, good to see you again. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
So the big need, we could have haggled about this, but it was 1 and 1A for Syracuse. They needed a point guard and they needed an impact center, and they still do need, as we speak here, to add another center from the portal. But point guard was the one that was really kind of the neon sign that was blinking above this team. And when I saw that Naithan George was available, this guy that led the ACC in assists, and certainly remember seeing him play Syracuse, could hit the three. Yeah, you go back, you look for the YouTube films and all the things from the past and said, okay, that would be a nice pluck for Syracuse out of the transfer portal. Lo and behold, Nate George is now Syracuse's point guard. So let's get to that point here. Why was Georgia Tech no longer the spot for Nate, and why is he now up in Syracuse, Chad?
You know, it's a great question, and obviously Nate will be able to handle that question better. For context, for folks who don't know, Nate George committed to Georgia Tech in the summer of 2023. And I'll never forget calling him up because there was reports that he was a class of 24, that he would have been a point guard this past season, a freshman. And I called him up to talk about his commitment. And he said, yeah, something to the effect of, I'm excited to get to work when I get there on Sunday. I said, what, excuse me? He said, yeah. I said, you're coming this year. And he said, yeah, I'll be a freshman. I'm enrolling Sunday and start classes on Tuesday or whatever it was. The point is that's how under-recruited Nate George was. He had hardly any offers. People didn't even know what class he was in. He was going to go to play at Seattle University if Damon Stoudemire didn't find him. So the fact that Damon Stoudemire sort of found him, gave him the chance, threw him into the starting lineup as a true freshman, and helped develop his game. And nobody knows the point guard position like Damon Stoudemire, right? So a couple years later to see that Nate George has decided to play somewhere else is definitely surprising. But I say all that to say is, Nate's been a part of 35 losses at his time at Georgia Tech. The crowd support has not been great in his time at Georgia Tech. There's been a lot of losses and a lot of heartbreak, and I think he's a competitive kid. And in this day and age where kids are always looking for, let's be honest, maybe a little bit more money and a little bit notoriety. Maybe in his thinking, Syracuse is the right place for him. It's a little bit closer to his home of Toronto, and I know he's still got family up there. So I think he's looking forward probably to playing in a big venue with a lot of people who really, really support his team and trying to get to the NCAA tournament, which Georgia Tech hasn't done during his tenure.
Yeah, I was curious about the Toronto connection. He did say in one of the comments that was out there that he wants to help be the one that helps lead Syracuse back into the NCAA tournament. They haven't made it for 4 years, which is an eternity around these parts, Chad. And he gets to play for another point guard, and Adrian Autry. So interesting connection there. We touched on a couple of things with his game, though, but if you had to kind of give me the Jay Billis breakdown of his game, how would you describe what Syracuse is getting there?
Well, I'll be curious to see, and I've said this elsewhere, is that, we in football, right, we talk about a system quarterback. Is a kid successful because he's in a certain system? And Nate George was definitely in a system, right? This pick and roll system that Damon Stoudemire loves to run. And when it's working, it's really, really good. And Nate George did an awesome job running that show and really developed into that system of learning where center Bayandongo was, learning where his forwards were, and then kicking the ball out on the perimeter. So will he be able to translate that game into whatever Syracuse offense likes to run for Nate, right? Will he be able to sort of adapt, or will Syracuse adapt to what's best for Nate George? I mean, he's a kid that can handle the ball extremely well, has a great vision. I can't tell you how many times he's made a great pass and his teammate has dropped the ball or let it roll out of bounds because they weren't ready for it, that style of passer. He can certainly hit the three. He can have a complete game. I mean, almost had a triple-double at the ACC tournament this past year. That to say is he has some work to do defensively. He's not going to be your shutdown defensive point guard yet. Now, can he be that? Of course, if he develops and works on that part of his game and really gets into the gym to be that guy, that can certainly happen. But he's not there yet. And then scoring the ball is just, some nights, again, he can score 24. Other nights he might go 2 for 13. So there's a consistency factor that he needs to work on. But I think what should give Syracuse fans hope is that he's a competitive kid. He's a kid that likes to work, and he's going to continue to try to improve those parts of his game so he can get to the next level.
The other player Syracuse picked up from Georgia Tech is Ibrahim Souare, and Syracuse needed point guard. They needed center, but certainly needed some depth just anywhere on the roster, given the number of players that went in the portal and kind of the usual transactions going on these days here. And I think this was an intriguing ad for Syracuse. Were you surprised that he left, and were you surprised that Syracuse was a destination he ended up at?
Yeah, it's sort of similar to Naithan George. Ibrahim Souare was a guy that redshirted his first year, certainly had a chance to go in the transfer portal last year and stuck around Georgia Tech. And Damon Stoudemire always used the word loyal when it came to Souare. He was thrown in the starting lineup this year because Tech was decimated with injuries. They really didn't have anybody left. And Souare, to his credit, played really, really well. He found his role as a rebounder, as a defensive presence in the paint. Again, sort of like Naithan George, not a shutdown defender, but does enough to really affect the game. And I go back to the Clemson game. They won in 3 overtimes at Clemson. I mean, Souare was arguably the MVP of that game. Just his energy, the minutes he played, an outstanding role player. Is he going to be an all-conference player? Not this year. Could he be over time? Possibly. But again, you mentioned the word depth. I think that's perfect. I mean, he's a guy that will be certainly pleased with coming off the bench and filling a role, especially for this first year with the Orange, and then maybe over time developing into a starting type player. So he's a guy who's not going to give you a ton offensively, but again, he can control the lane, he can rebound a ton, and distribute the ball to teammates who will score for Syracuse.
Well, Chad, we appreciate your perspective on these basketball guys, but we'll definitely have to circle back once football time comes around. That Syracuse-Georgia Tech game turned into a juicy one last year, and Syracuse is going to be spending a lot of time in Atlanta this year for football. They're going to start the year against Tennessee in Atlanta, then circle back to play Georgia Tech. So we'll definitely get you back on the pod soon, but really appreciate your perspective on those guys today.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks a lot, Brent.
So, Nick, I certainly want to get your perspective on the type of player that Syracuse is getting in Nate Kingz. But, boy, what a story he has. And those that have not seen it, I would encourage you to dial it up. We've got it on syracuse.com. And he has one heck of a story, including, Nick, that his name was not Nate Kingz until recently, right?
No, a year ago, well, almost a year ago, he changed it. His previous name was Madoff, and I do not know what his birth name was, because nobody seems to know what his birth parents' last name is. He took Madoff from his adopted mother, who may or may not be still in his life. It's hard to know. She follows him on social media, but he never really when I asked about him, he never really wanted to say much about her. So I don't know what the situation is there, but yeah, he just, I guess as a kid, he was growing up on the playgrounds and everybody called him King. And so he went with that and went into a courthouse in Salem, Oregon, and changed his name to Kingz. He wanted to start a new path.
So that's where the Kingz comes from, the nickname back in the day on the courts. Yeah. And boy, I'll tell you, folks, if you haven't read the story, carve out some time for it. Nick did an incredible job on that, and it's really interesting to get this kind of background on Nate coming in here. So that's an interesting story that I would encourage people to go read. We don't want to give everything away here, right? So we want people to go read the story. The player, to see him just, guys transfer in, you watch the highlight reels, and you kind of get a sense of what's coming in here. But one thing that really pops about him, Nick, is Syracuse is getting a 44% three-point shooter, and not often you get a lefty on that realm either.
Yeah, and I don't know that we saw anywhere close to the best of Nate this season. When Wayne Tinkle recruited him, he thought his real strength was defense, but because of the knee problem he had, where he tore his ACL during, before the 23-24 season, missed the whole season, he felt like, he still wasn't 100% when it comes to, playing defense. Wayne really thought that was something that was going to come out this next year was his defense. But the 3-point shooting, you see a 44%, but that actually is dumbed down from what it was first half of the season. He was well over 50% the first half of the season. He kind of cooled off the second half. Maybe teams had a better scout on him. I don't know, but he was. I mean, there were games where he just didn't miss, and that's his game is shooting there. He also has got. He also can drive it pretty well. But I think he's the kind of guy that can give you 18 to 20 a night, a lot of nights, maybe not every night, but you could count on him getting, 15 to 18 probably just about any night, depending on how Syracuse plays him.
So, Ben, as best as you can tell, why did William Kyle III enter the portal? Why didn't it quite work out at UCLA for him?
Well, I think it was kind of an undefined role for him, and I think he thought that maybe he would get a few more minutes than he did and contend for the starting job. But I think it was kind of like a mutual dissatisfaction with the situation. But I do think there is a lot of unrealized upside with Will going forward that maybe, he can utilize at Syracuse. And one thing that hasn't written about much is he had a heart procedure around Christmas break. Coach Cronin had said he was getting fatigued after a few minutes on the court early in the year, And I think they kind of solved that problem with this heart procedure. We haven't talked to Will about it since it happened, but I think he's willing. He's able to go longer now, and I'm not sure what the roster is at Syracuse, but I think if not start, he's able to play 20 plus minutes a night going forward. So I think if you're a Syracuse fan looking at his upside and potential, I think there is a lot there.
Yeah, that's something to think about and talk to Will about that heart condition. And that's interesting to bring that up because there was a big need for center in the portal for Syracuse. They don't have any centers beyond William Kyle at this point that are true centers. They could certainly shift a couple players over that way and play the position. But everything you've seen from Will, it sounds like maybe not a starter at center, but a guy that can give you 20 to 25 minutes a night. Is that how you would look at it, Ben, or can he be a starter?
I think he could be a starter. I think his strengths, he's not a polished offensive player around the basket. He's a definite lob threat. Really high-end athleticism. Can be a rim runner, and his strength, I think, is defensively. Great shot blocker. He was in the end of a game against Wisconsin, and he made Coach Cronin look smart for putting him in the last minute because he blocked a shot to save the game for UCLA. So he's got that potential. He did have a lot of highlights, had some great dunks in a game against North Carolina and throughout the season. But the one thing I think he really needs to work on, two things would be, I think his rebounding rate is a little bit low given his size. He needs to work on, rebounding instincts. And then, as I alluded to earlier, just kind of polishing up his offensive moves around the basket. I don't think he's a guy you're going to run your offense through or really work it into him other than, the occasional lob threat type situation. But I think he's got a lot of value defensively, and I think there is a lot of unrealized upside and potential for him to be, either a heavily used reserve or a starter.
It's draft season, my friends, and it is really ramping up here. And Syracuse fans are excited because it has been a while since they have seen this many names on the board. And Jordan Reid from ESPN joins us here. Jordan, Fran Brown's a good recruiter, but one of the best recruiting tools you can have is on the 3 days of the NFL draft. You see those names on the bottom line, or you see those names in the best available rankings. And it feels like this is a year Syracuse is going to be on the board for pretty much all 3 days of the draft. That's good news for them.
Yeah, it is. And I actually helped out with the ACC Network road trip this past season. And it was my first trip up to Syracuse and seeing the campus up there and just seeing it really was essentially when Coach Fran Brown really took over, just seeing how he's able to infuse his blueprint during fall practices and just the assertiveness that he had and just how glowingly he talked about his team. Little did we know they would end up winning 10 games this past season. So a credit to him and his staff and everything that they have done, and that's reflected in this year's draft class.
Yeah, and there's no better recruiting tool than when you got a quarterback that's in the conversation. No use burying the lead here, Jordan. This is the guy everybody's looking at here. So Kyle McCord, you have him 5th in your positional rankings. I think most people have him somewhere in that category, some a little higher, some a little lower here. But just what's the buzz on Kyle McCord right now when people bring him up and just his pro prospects? What are the things that come to mind for you?
Well, I think with Kyle, he deserves a ton of credit for basically reinventing himself during his time at Syracuse, just because things did not end well for him at Ohio State. We know what happened at the end of the season there. And, him going with Fran, somebody that he's known essentially all of his life, and being able to just, take a deep breath and really recollect himself. And then you could really see the leadership really take over on that team starting off at the beginning of the season. I thought he played well from the beginning point all the way through the end, outside of that uncharacteristic Pitt game where he had 5 interceptions. But outside of that game, I thought he played really well for the betterment of the season, led the country in passing yards last season. So that just goes to show you how comfortable he was in the scheme. And it's very rare to see a quarterback that's only been on campus for a short amount of time as he was, and then just to play so well. But that's why I have him as my 5th ranked quarterback. I have him as a 4th round pick right now, but it wouldn't surprise me if he does sneak inside the 3rd round. There's been some teams that I have talked to that really like him as high as the 3rd round.
Yeah, it putting the draft order and trades and all kinds of things that could affect where he goes, what round it is. what are teams that you look at and you say he fits there? That's a guy that could step right in, maybe not necessarily start right away, but man, he fits them like a glove.
There's quite a few teams, honestly. I look at Pittsburgh. I think the Steelers have a huge need for a quarterback, whether it's an early round or a mid round guy. He definitely fits into that situation. I look at the Cowboys. If somebody's looking for a backup, he definitely could fit in there. Miami is another system that he fits in really well as well, but more so the Steelers. The Steelers is one team I definitely think he fits on. Also, I would throw in the Jets as well. The Jets are another team. Even though they did just sign Justin Fields, I definitely think they're going to look to take a mid to a late round quarterback to compete with Jordan Travis, who they drafted a season ago. So McCord definitely fits in. And it's not just those teams. He fits in so many various other teams as well. But those would be the 4 teams that I definitely do think he would fit like a glove on.
Yeah, Kyle grew up a Jets fan. Wears the number 6 because of Mark Sanchez. So I'm sure that would be a mini dream come true if he ended up going there for sure. They were very interested in him at Pro Day, by the way, Jordan. They were the Jets were certainly around and very interested in Kyle at that Pro Day. What are the attributes that carry over to the NFL right now for Kyle McCord?
Well, one for me is just the decisiveness and the conviction that he plays with. It's very rare to see him hold on to the ball, and that's something that you want to see from these quarterbacks. Just how comfortable are they in the scheme? How is their decision making? And then also the accuracy with Kyle McCord. And the game that I love to point to that I thought was one of his better ones from a throw making standpoint was Georgia Tech. That Georgia Tech game, he's just making NFL throw after NFL throw. He had a couple over the middle. He had another one down the sideline as well that I really enjoyed just watching on tape and just recollecting as far as some of my favorite throws that he made over this past season. So just the accuracy, the decision making, and then just the flashes of NFL throws that he's able to make consistently.
Yeah, that was a game that really stood out. I think you recently put this on your Twitter feed. There was one throw in particular in that game. I turned to a friend and colleague of mine who was sitting next to me at that game in the press box, and it is a podcast, but I won't repeat all the language that I use, but I just said, holy bleep, that's an NFL throw. Like, you just can tell and you can see it. And from that game forward, I felt like, not that Kyle wasn't on the NFL radar before, but that really made him pop in that category. I guess the one thing people look at as a weakness, Jordan, and maybe you can throw in one or two others here as we discuss this here, but mobility. Everybody's looking for quarterbacks they can throw on the run. And look, Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson and some of these guys, like they're on a different planet. Not everybody you're going to get is going to have that kind of mobility. But is that something that knocks McCord down the list a little bit? And what are maybe some of the other things he's got to work on to excel at the next level?
Well, I don't think he's a statue at all. Just to, kind of rebuttal that I don't think he's a statue by any means necessary. He does have a little bit of mobility. Now, is he Jalen Milroe or anybody like that? No, we're not going to mistake him for that. But I don't think he's a statue by any means necessary. I think he can get himself out of harm's way. He can avoid some sacks. And then if there's some grass available to him, I think he's able to get that. But that's just not the name of his game. He wants to win from the pocket. He can roll out, he can sprint out and throw the ball. He can do some of those things. So I don't think he's necessarily limited to strictly being confined within the pocket. I definitely think he can do some throws off of various different types of platforms. So that would be my rebuttal for that. But another weakness I would add is just, the decision making at times, especially when things start to crumble. And I referenced that Pitt game a lot with him. You would like to see him overcome some of that adversity and have some short-term memory as well. But that's being very selective. And I think outside of that one game, that really was the only one of where he just had disastrous decision-making. And, that definitely was an outlier game for him. I don't think any other game in his career was necessarily like that. So just being able to consistently overcome adversity and not just stacking those bad decisions within games.
And you mentioned it earlier, think about 4th round, but maybe could slip into the 3rd round on McCord. Okay, so just going through some of the other names and positions here, Jordan. LeQuint Allen. Your colleague Mel Kiper Jr. loves LeQuint Allen, by the way, which is we've enjoyed hearing that here in Syracuse. But he's an intriguing prospect because he really improved in his pass catching ability in the past couple of years. Back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, rushing as well. But he is a true weapon catching the football. This is a very deep running back draft. It's interesting how we hear every year, there's no running backs, but this year it's like all of them came into this class. So where does LeQuint fit in what is a very deep running back class?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite running backs in the draft. And, Mel Kiper stole my idea. I still text him back and forth about LeQuint all the time and how I was trying to keep him a secret. And now the cat is out the bag with him. But no, I mean, just being able to sit down with LeQuint back when we visited in the fall, just his story. He has a remarkable story, how he was able to overcome adversity and how he just stuck to the plan. He bought into what Fran Brown was preaching back when he got hired early on. And he was one of those pillar pieces that I like to say of the program that really worked his way into being a starting role, over the past few seasons. But I think what separates him from some of the other running backs in this year's class is that he's the total package at the position. He blocks his tail off. He's a really good pass catcher. And, oh, yeah, he's a great runner between the tackles. He can run on the perimeter as well. And then you throw in, he's going to be one of the few 20-year-old prospects on draft day in this year's draft class. So a really young prospect as well. And I think his best ball is ahead of him, but he just has so many different feathers in his cap already of where he can play all three downs. You can keep him on the field in order to pass block as well. And I can use him. He's an asset in the passing game as well. So I think he's one of those guys that's probably going to go in the 4th round. And when we look back on this class, you're going to be like, man, it was a loaded running back class, but he was one of the better ones overall in this year's group.
I feel like, and there's a number of players that maybe fit this description, but I just keep envisioning LeQuint staying in orange. He just feels like a Sean Payton type player to me. The Broncos are a team that I think, like you said, gets about that 4th round. They need that running back, 3rd down back. Just feels like a Sean Payton type pick here. So I would put the Broncos up there, but it feels like he would fit a number of teams, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can go down the list. There's probably going to be 25 or 26 others that he's going to fit in. This running back class is loaded. Like, I have 32 draftable grades on the running backs this year. And the last time we've seen a class that loaded was back in 2017, where there was exactly 30 drafted that year. So we could see even more drafted that year. And interestingly enough, Alvin Kamara was in that draft class, and we saw what Sean Payton was able to do with him in New Orleans. So not saying that LeQuint is going to be Alvin Kamara, he's going to have that type of career, but just the type of versatility that LeQuint has is very comparable to that type of running back on the next level.
Jordan, moving on to Oronde Gadsden. Of course, his father played in the NFL, a longtime Miami Dolphins receiver, and we have seen him really blossom into just one of those players that you just knew was on his way to kind of follow in the footsteps of his father here. But for those that don't know, why did OG get classified as an H-back? Why does he fit there better than maybe a tight end classification?
Yeah, there's always debate about tight ends. Are they H-backs? Are they what I call F tight ends? Are they called F tight ends, which is just flex, and then Y tight ends, which is just a combination of blockers as well as receiving threats? I think he fits more so in that F tight end category. So F/H-back, they're essentially the same thing, just because where his hay is going to be made is in the receiving aspect of his game. That's where I think he's different than a lot of other tight ends in this year's class. But I was just happy to see him healthy this year. He was banged up over the past few years of his career, but now that he was able to be healthy, go out and play a full season, we saw the real Oronde Gadsden that everybody was expecting throughout his career. So kudos to him. I was happy to see him healthy, but the route running ability, the catching ability, of course, the genes that he has, the NFL bloodlines, these are things that's going to work in his favor in the draft room.
Where do you think a round classification for him at this point?
I have a 3rd round grade on him. I think he could go as high as the 3rd round, but once again, like his other teammates in this class, 3rd or 4th round range, I definitely think that's where he ends up coming off of the board. But once again, it boils down to the medicals with him. How clean are the medicals? Of course, we don't have on the media side, we don't have access to that stuff, and every team is going to feel differently about that as far as the medicals, how much they trust him to stay healthy in the future as well. But if we're going off just what we saw last year and what we've seen in the pre-draft all-star game circuit as well, where I thought he was one of the better players at the Shrine game as well, I would feel comfortable taking him in the 3rd round, just because he changes the dynamic of your passing game as well. And you're talking about the mismatches that he creates against those linebackers, those nickel corners, those safeties. I think he can win consistently against all those types of players on the next level.
Yeah, that Lisfranc injury is always a tricky one to see, but I'm not a doctor. I just play one on a podcast, Jordan, but he looked okay to me last year. Like, he's pretty dominant. He looked good at pro day. Look at, as you said, at the Shrine Bowl. Like, I think you'll be okay taking a risk in selecting OG. Alijah Clark's next guy on my list here, and it's always a help when you're versatile. Now, in some cases, NFL teams want to put you in a certain classification. Justin Barron's another guy we'll talk about here shortly who they see as a linebacker at the next level, so he's really honing in on that. But Clark can play corner and safety. I would imagine they're probably looking at him more as a safety, but to have that in your back pocket is good. It seems like he had a good all-star season, good pro day, good we'll see how the workouts line up here as we get closer to the draft. But what do you think on Clark?
Yeah, he's a late round hopeful right now, but what you love about him is just the versatility that he has. And as you mentioned, there's some teams that like him as a strong safety. There's some teams that like him as a nickel corner and what's called a rover, which is just essentially an outside linebacker slash nickel corner as well. But the great thing about him is that he's had experience at a lot of these different positions. He really was the linchpin in that secondary during his time at Syracuse. So the versatility is something that you love, but also where he's going to have to make his hay is on special teams, especially when you're a late round guy. You have to be able to be what's called a core 4 special teams guy. So if you're able to play on all those special teams, which he has experience doing, that's where he's going to have to earn a lot of his reps before he essentially sees some reps as far as as a safety or a nickel corner.
I want to go back to the offensive side of the ball for a minute here. I'm intrigued by Jackson Meeks and what he can do at the next level. Jordan, he just missed out on some of the all-star visit, or he was at the Shrine Bowl, I should say, just missed out on the combine, seemed to be right on the cut line for that, so he didn't get that opportunity, but I don't know, he just feels like a pro to me. I just feel, and special teams is something I think he could work on. There was a lot of plays in the red zone this year where he got up really high and gave McCord a big target there. I don't necessarily know, and I'll be curious to hear what you think, if he's a guy that will get drafted, but he just feels like somebody that can get in a camp and turn some heads.
Yeah, he's on the fence as far as if he's a 7th round guy or a priority free agent. If he does not get drafted, I definitely think he's going to be a high priority for a lot of teams. And just seeing him on the All-Star game circuit, he's just really smooth. Like his ability to run routes, his ability to catch the ball is really effortless with him. He's a natural route runner as well. He's able to sync everything together as far as his hand-eye coordination as well. So he was a huge standout to me on the pre-draft All-Star game circuit. But it's just a matter of exactly where you feel comfortable taking him, whether that's the 7th round guy or as a priority free agent. But he's going to be in someone's training camp next year.
Couple defensive guys wanted to throw at you here. Fadil Diggs transferred into Syracuse from Texas A&M. Great pass rusher, can play linebacker if needed. He did have to line up at linebacker a little bit this year for Syracuse, but I almost see him maybe as similar to Meeks in that he's right on the cut line, but would be a priority free agent if he doesn't get picked.
So I think you're wrong. I think this is the one that may shock you with how high he's drafted. I think he could go in the 4th or the 5th round. Honestly. Just because if you think about it, you look at the Eagles, you look at these other teams around the league. What do NFL teams love? They love guys that can get after the quarterback. And we know Fadil Diggs is able to do that. So if he goes in the 4th or the 5th round, I think he's going to have to be what's called a DPR, which is just a designated pass rusher early on, and then work his way into eventually hoping to develop into a starter. But we've seen these guys take similar pathways to being DPRs and then go on to be starters, 2, 3, 4 years into their career. But whether it's at Texas A&M or at Syracuse, he consistently was able to get after the quarterback. So teams are starved for players like Fadil Diggs, and he has that lineup versatility as well, where you can reduce him down inside on those late down situations, those obvious passing downs. And also, we know he's an experienced pass rusher off of the edge as well. So for these teams that are starved for pass rushers off of the edge, I think there's going to be a lot of interest in Fadil Diggs. And then you take into account, he tested really well at the combine. For some reason, he didn't get more buzz from the media standpoint about that. But you go out and run a 4.57 at his size. That's really impressive.
Great point. That could be your new LeQuint Allen. You were trying to keep him a secret. Maybe Fadil's the guy you kind of sit down and say, that's my guy right there. It makes a lot of sense what you said, too, about the Eagles and teams that are looking for those pass rushers. So we'll keep an eye on that. Couple more defensive guys here, Jordan. There was a great moment at Syracuse Pro Day. Marlowe Wax comes out and runs his 40, and he exploded out of the gate. He ran a great 40. I think it was like 4.54, something in that range, depending on who's clocking it. But it was a culmination, Jordan, of this is a guy that fought through injury last year, got back on the field. He admittedly said he came back too early because he just wanted to help his team. And we were kind of wondering how that was going to affect what he wanted to do at the next level. But it feels like he's healthy. He's got his speed back. And the reaction from, I mean, pretty much the whole team was at pro day. Like, you would have pro days are weird. You've been to these things. They're quiet sometimes. They're running 40s. Nobody knows what's going on. Was that good? I don't know. Was that fast? Because nobody really says anything. But, man, there was a huge reaction when Marlowe ran his 40. So they were happy about that. But where does this all fall into play in terms from a pro perspective? Is he somebody who's getting back on the radar?
Yeah, just talking to Fran back in August when we did visit there, and we actually had Marlowe mic'd up during practices. You could just hear his leadership, how he was the nucleus of that defense, and everything really ran through him. And he has an infectious personality as well. So he's another he's probably going to be a priority free agent, but I think there's going to be a lot of teams that have a lot of interest in him just because he has a lot of prerequisites that you love to see at the position. He has really good instincts. He's a consistent wrap up and finish tackler as well. He has experience on special teams. And then everything about playing the position, I think he has a lot of intriguing or translatable traits that translate to the next level. So he's one of those guys I think is going to be a priority free agent, but there's going to be a lot of teams scrambling, trying to add him to their roster just because of the production that he's had in previous years too.
And Jordan, last but certainly not least, is Justin Barron. He was at the Senior Bowl. This guy that had to play a couple of different positions on the Syracuse defense this year when Marlowe went down, as a matter of fact. He was the guy that kind of had to step in for him and float all over the place here. It feels like they want him to focus on linebacker at the next level. What kind of buzz are you hearing on Justin possibly getting into draft position or being a priority for a free agent, if not?
He's in that same bucket as Marlowe, a late round hopeful that's probably going to end up being a priority free agent. He's a bit of a tweener, outside linebacker, safety, but another guy that's going to have to make his hay on special teams. But you talk about somebody that he's a thumper on tape. I mean, he has some outstanding hits throughout the season. So, he's very physical. He loves and he embraces the contact portion of playing the position. So there's really no reservations about how he can translate to playing linebacker just because it's different. Transitioning from safety to linebacker, things happen a little bit quicker. And then you're taking on running backs and those pulling linemen and climbing linemen a little bit quicker than if you were a safety. So I think he's another guy that's in the same bucket as Marlowe. Is probably going to be a priority free agent, but he's going to be in someone's training camp next year.
Well, Jordan, it's exciting times for Syracuse fans because of the 10-win season. They've got one of the harder schedules I've ever seen Syracuse put up this upcoming year, but people are fired up, and I think draft time is going to be a time that gets people juiced up again because, as we said, Syracuse is going to be on that bottom line scroll pretty much all 3 days here, and that's a little thing that can give you a little juice in recruiting. So we'll see how things play out. I really appreciate your time and your perspective on this. Keep up the good work at ESPN, and we'll definitely get you on again down the road, my friend.
No problem. Thanks as always, Brent.
Thanks for hanging once again here on this episode of Syracuse Sports, everybody. We're on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe there. Make sure you follow wherever you get your podcasts so when new episodes come your way, you don't miss a darn thing. Become a Syracuse Sports Insider to get the latest news, info, analysis, and opinion on all matters of Syracuse sports. Get your voice heard on this podcast, our live Thursday podcast. Yeah, Chris Carlson and I flip on the live button every Thursday, talk about the latest in Syracuse sports. Spring football coverage, lacrosse, hot and heavy right now. Yeah, they're playing Cornell randomly on Long Island this weekend. It's the same time as the spring game. It's not ideal when you're playing the number one team in the country, but we have full coverage of lacrosse and all things Syracuse sports. Become a Syracuse Sports Insider today to get direct text message access to me, just $3.99 a month for that. Don't forget, you can try it out free for 2 weeks to see what it's all about. If you're at the spring game on Saturday, speaking of which, say hello. We'll be roaming around the dome and out on the quad before all the festivities begin. And Javon Edmonds and I will have a full Syracuse football spring game pod to come after the activities are over on Saturday afternoon. So there's a lot happening. Make sure you stay tuned here on the pod and on the Syracuse Sports Insider text line to get the latest. So thanks to all of our guests today. We got great insight from all of our guests, including Ben Bolch of the LA Times, Chad Bishop of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Nick Dashel from Oregon Live, and of course, Jordan Reid from ESPN and his great commentary on the upcoming NFL Draft. Backyard Wrestling, our featured artist today. If you want your original music highlighted here on Syracuse Sports, all the info is in the show notes. Check it out. Let's hear Weekend Warrior in its entirety to take us out. We'll talk to you next time here on Syracuse Sports.
I lock eyes with my manager, Dave, and he walks up to me to say, can you stay just a little late? I know you got a lot on your plate.
That would be great.
And so I contemplate how much more of this I got to take. But for now I'm plotting my escape, and when I make it to the end of the day, I'm a weekend warrior. I'm a Saturday night sensation. Na 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 na. I'm a weekend warrior. A weekend warrior. Cross paths with a customer who seems like she's got something to prove. When she starts to act a little rude, I bite my tongue and I try to behave.
I want to speak to your manager.
But if you only knew the kind of things that I would do if I didn't have to lie to you and smile for my minimum wage. I'm a weekend warrior. I'm a Saturday night sensation. Na 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 na. I'm a weekend warrior. A weekend warrior. I'm a weekend warrior. I'm a Saturday night